Imagine if you put your hand up in the middle of COVID and decided that what you wanted to do was say that I will do whatever it takes to defend what being Australian means. And part of that is freedom and the right over bodily autonomy. Doesn't sound like a weird thing for Australians to do, but that's exactly what happened. What if you put your hand up along with hundreds of other people and you were the only one to get elected to Parliament? How would that affect your life? Well, we're going to find out right now after almost a year and a half in elected office as a senator for the United Australia Party for the state of Victoria. Here comes Senator Ralph Babet. Ralph, welcome back to TNT Radio.
G'day, mate. Thank you for having me on this. Well, for those of you that are watching this after the fact, it is a Saturday afternoon here in Australia. Hard to believe that it's been a year and a half already. Where has the time gone? Time of my life that I will unfortunately never get back, but we're doing what we can. We're fighting the good fight for, you know what, common sense and traditional Australian values. But you know what? Someone's got to fight that fight. That someone is me right now. And my hope and my dream and my desire is that at the next federal election, you watching at home right now, mum and dad or young guy or girl, on your couch, on your phone, wherever you might be, you decide to throw your hand up for federal parliament or state parliament or even council, whatever it is. The point is, I need you to get active because the world that we live in today is not as black and white as we would like it to believe. And there are people in power right now that shouldn't be there. You know what? It should be you. You should be there, whoever you are watching this podcast. But thank you, Jason.
Good on you, Ralph. I appreciate that because it's a really important stage. Just because you get into a position and you're in office, etc., doesn't mean you're always a politician. It doesn't mean that there's some weird spell or something in the water down in Canberra that makes you turn a certain way. You're allowed to be a maverick. And who would have thought that I'm going to quote Paul Keating right now, but it was Paul Keating that said that in politics, only the maddies, that was the word he used, are the ones that can get things done. And he regarded himself as a bit of a maddie. So you have to be an outlier in politics just to be able to gain some sort of traction to get your voice heard in there. And remembering that there's some 230 elected parliamentarians in both houses, that's a lot of work to do to be heard. So how do you go about in Parliament, just getting out there for your maiden speech? When you went and did yours, for example, your maiden speech, did you write that all by yourself? Did you have help in doing it? And were you feeling intimidated when you got up finally to be able to do that in the Parliament? Was it as perhaps as exciting as you were hoping it to be, or as important as it may have turned out to be? How did it all happen?
So as far as the maiden speech, great question, by the way. As far as the maiden speech goes, I wrote it by myself. But you mentioned one word there, which I want to just focus on for a brief moment. You mentioned intimidation. Intimidation, that's a great word. And that, I guess that's how I felt when I was first elected. I was a little bit intimidated. I thought, where am I going into? I'm going into a place of learned men and women. These men and women are so intelligent. They know so much more than what I do. And, am I going to be able to fit in? Am I going to be able to, have influence? Am I going to be even able to speak to these people? Because I've seen them on television, I've heard them on radio, I've seen them on social media, I've seen them on Rumble and, the other platforms and things like that. And I just thought, wow, can I do it? And within 3 minutes of walking into that place, I'm telling you now, these people are borderline, I want to use the R word. I'm just going to say it. They're borderline retarded. That's what they are. Borderline retarded. Even though I know that's not a politically correct word to say, but you know what? I'm not about being politically correct. I'm about just saying it how it is and just doing what needs to be done. So the message that I have from that for you at home out there that think, that Parliament House is populated by these super intelligent, super clever people, I'm telling you now, it's not. It's populated that people that really, if they weren't in those positions that they're in now, they'd be doing nothing meaningful at all outside of the Parliament. I mean, you've got people there that have never even run a small business. They don't know how to balance the books. They don't even know how to, pay their taxes. They don't know how to turn a profit. They can't do anything, especially the people from the Labor Party right now. And you know what? It shows. It's showing right now with the mismanagement that we're seeing with our country now. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to figure out that we're not on a good path right now. You can tell that every time you go to the shops and you open your wallet. You know exactly how our country is going. You know exactly how our country is going when you get your power bill in the mail. You know how it's going. You know exactly how our country is going because you understand how much more difficult your life is right now than what it was just a few years ago. And it's only been, a year and a half or thereabouts of this new Labor government, and look what they've done already. Now, granted, they shouldn't take all the blame. Some of the blame does lie with the Liberal Party as well, but you can't keep blaming the Liberal Party forever, like the Labor Party is trying to do now. At some point, you're going to have to say, we're in government now, we're steering the ship, it's our responsibility, and we have to fix it. And I've heard none of that from this Labor government, none of that at all. So people at home, like I was saying when I first came on, please get involved in the political process. The vast majority of you out there will do a far better job than Minister Chris Bowen. You'll do a far better job than Prime Minister Albanese, who knows absolutely nothing from the real world. He's basically been a career politician all his life. And that's a huge problem because of the fact that he's never had a genuine real job. He's never lived a real life, not like you have. He's never had to potentially look at, missing a payment on his phone bill or his mortgage or, struggle to, put food in the shopping cart when he's going to the shops and things. He's never done that. You've done that. You have more life experience than arguably and what the Prime Minister does. And we need people like you, regular everyday people, to be active in the political process because the only people that can change the country for the better is you, because you are a normal person from the community, so you understand the pain points that everyday people are going through. But like you said before, my maiden speech is from the heart. I wrote that myself. It didn't take very long to write it all. It only took maybe 2-3 hours to write it. And I talk about a whole host of issues in that, all the way from traditional Australian values to overseas influences from the UN, the WHO, global elites, all sorts of things. Now, if you haven't seen my speech, please check it out on my social media YouTube channel. After this, I promise you will love it, if I don't say so myself.
Good on you, Ralph. Now, something that you brought up there was this idea of governments blaming the previous government for their woes. I look at it and think that it's an example, a glaring example of the lack of true leadership. And if you're a true leader, you deal with the good and the bad, and it's how you deal with adversity that creates it. I mean, in our own lives, when we lose a job, for example, and we run out of money to pay the rent or the mortgage next week, how we evolve in that situation, how we get our hands on money to keep paying the rent. For example, do we sell a motor vehicle? Do we borrow money off our credit card, or what do we do when we don't have it? And this is something that no politician that's been in the job for 20 years would even know, because they've never had that experience. They get paycheck every month. The money's in the account. It's more money than most people get. So they've got no real excuse to have any financial woes. And if you don't have a financial struggle, you can never have an ability to become more financially educated. And it seems that adversity is the most important tool to get growth. You don't get growth by living inside a comfort zone. You get growth by living outside of a comfort zone. Now, at the same time, no one's advocating for people to undergo adversity or harm, but at the same time, it's the experience that you're appealing to now in the audience that may be watching or today or in the future, and saying that, yes, I do recognize those situations and I don't need to be PhD qualified or some form of professor. I don't even need to have a tertiary degree to put my hand up and represent my own community. So that's a really important statement to make there. The other thing I wanted to mention about this leadership blame crossover is I sometimes refer to it as followship. I feel like that politicians aren't leaders at all, but they pretend that they are in a procession, as Mark Latham may have said, a conga line of suckholes was his famous quote. And you have a series of followers playing almost a game of follow the leader, but there is no leader. Is that more of a better understanding of how Parliament works today?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question about leadership, and I'd like to answer that question with some good experience now that I've been in there for about a year and a half. I'm going to tell you right now that I'll be very careful about the words that I choose here. Your elected parliamentarian is not who runs the country. I'll tell you right now, they don't run the show. Donald Trump refers to it as the deep state. Fair enough. I'll put an Australian spin on it. I'll say it's the Billabong, right? And the Billabong is deep. The people that really control the country, you'll never know their name. You'll never see. You probably will never see them on television. You'll never see a written piece of communication from them. And you know who they are? They are the bureaucrats. Okay, at the very basic level, it's the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats are the one that run the show in this country. Yes. Because your elected parliamentarian, he or she will come. They'll do their 3 years, or if they're a senator, their 6 years, and then they're gone. That's it. They're gone. The bureaucrat will sit there for a lifetime. I'm not talking about the low-level bureaucrat that's pushing papers around. I'm talking at the highest levels. These people are in those positions of power for multiple administrations. They never go. They're in the background. They don't really even face scrutiny. And they have too much of a hand, I believe, too much of a hand on the direction of the nation. Your elected parliamentarian will come into a room. They'll sit down with the bureaucrat. The bureaucrat will say X, Y, Z, and then they'll choose one of the options, and that's it. Which is understandable because your elected parliamentarian is not a subject matter expert on everything. I get that. But I think that your elected parliamentarians need to take much more ownership and more of an interest in the direction of the nation, rather than taking too much direction from these unaccountable bureaucrats in the background. And that's a huge problem with Canberra right now. Huge problem. And we're seeing it manifest in all sorts of ways. We're seeing it manifest right now with the WHO legislation that's coming along. We're seeing it manifest where we take too much guidance from groups like the United Nations, groups like the World Economic Forum, where they have so much influence over the direction of our nation, because your elected parliamentarian is not taking as much of an active interest as they should on the direction of where this country is going. That's a huge problem. Absolutely massive problem. And these problems only get solved when regular everyday people stand up and say, I've had enough, and then get involved in the political process rather than sit on the sidelines. I think a big problem that we have right now, and I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent right now, but I think a bit of a problem that we have is the average person sitting at home, they're not active enough. And I see it all the time. Like all these people that are sitting on social media, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, they're posting comments, they're saying, we're not happy about this. Yeah, I get you're not happy about it, but what are you going to do now? You're going to have to do something. You can't just complain on Facebook. You can't just complain on Instagram, on X. You can't do that. I mean, that's great and all. And, it's good to see that we're part of a community and people are getting unhappy, but you're going to have to do more. And you're going to have to join a party. And most importantly, you have to volunteer your time, and you can't be afraid to speak. Now, there's a big push at the moment, Jason, to silence people and to stop people speaking in all sorts of spheres, everywhere. Do not be afraid to speak. Just say it. I mean, just before I noticed that I was about to do it to myself, I was about to self-censor where I used the word, I wanted to use the word retard. Now, I know that I'm going to get flack for that on Monday. I know I will. I know that it's not politically correct, and I was looking for another word in my head, but that's what came to me first, right? I was about to self-censor, and self-censoring is, I think it's the biggest tool that the people that run the show have against people like me and people like you at home, where they get you to, check yourself and think, should I really say that? Do I want to say that? Am I going to get cancelled? It's just one small example of, how these people want to keep you quiet. And I think it's wrong.
Look, I agree with you. And the misinformation bill is something that's expected to come up next year in Parliament, and we'll have to talk a little bit more about if you've got any specific dates on that. But I want to make reference to what you said before about the bureaucrats being in charge. And a perfect example, we saw it during COVID, was on those daily ridiculous press conferences where they would come out and tell you about the number of cases and that tragically a 98-year-old person has passed away from COVID, and you're left scratching your head. And then one reporter every 2-3 weeks would ask a question about when these lockdowns would end, and the response was always from the minister giving the latest update. Well, we'll wait for our health advice and we will follow the health advice. And that health advice, of course, comes from an appointed health official in a particular state or the federal person in that situation. And these people are the ones that are making all the decisions. So when you see or hear of an elected politician almost handing over their responsibility, we're no longer responsible because the health advisor is going to provide that information. What, therefore, at that point, Ralph, is the purpose of the politician in power? Should they just sit down and say, well, this person is now in charge, I'm just showing you that I have got no real clout here? Why do they just hand over at that point? Or is that an example of how the bureaucracy is really in charge all along?
Yeah. Exactly. It's a great example of how the bureaucrats are really in charge. And the reason why the bureaucrats are in charge is because you have people that are elected today that don't really care, in my opinion, they don't care about the nation as much as what they should. Because if they cared about the nation as much as what they should, they would really take accountability and responsibility for every single decision made, right? But they're so quick and so eager to pass the buck, so to speak, pass the buck to somebody else. These are not the kinds of people that should be in charge. I didn't elect, the director of XYZ organization. I elected you, my member of parliament, to go out and make those decisions on my behalf. So the people that we elect into these positions of great power, we need to be more mindful of who they are. Choosing the right people is brutally important for our nation, and it will be more obvious as time goes by when we make those wrong decisions, because the good times that we've experienced over the last, 50, 60 years or so are coming to an end. Those good times are coming to an end. We are looking at decline at the moment because consistently for a very long period of time, we've chosen people to lead our nation that unfortunately don't have an Australia first attitude. They have a globalist attitude. So they've put the interest of globalist organizations ahead of our nation here. I'll give you just one example. All right, one example. Let's look at net zero, for example. Okay. Net zero, they will argue that we need to hit net zero because the world is going to burn if we don't. The head of the UN, what's his name? Guterres, I think his name is, or whatever it is. He actually said that we're entering an era of global boiling if we don't do more to hit low emissions very, very quickly. Global boiling. I mean, come on, mate. Global boiling. That's a whole other thing. But the people that run our country today have basically said, okay, Australia is responsible for, I think probably even less than 1% or thereabouts anyway of global emissions, right? About that. China is responsible for 30 times what we emit, right? But they've said, oh, we emit 1%, so we're going to shut down our entire... Let's just assume for a second that we believe that, carbon is going to heat the world, global boil. Let's say we believe it. They said, okay, we're going to shut our country down as quickly as we can, basically, hand over our manufacturing capacity to other nations, reduce our quality of life, make it so that our citizens suffer here while doing absolutely nothing about China that emits 30 times more carbon or roughly than what we do. Doing absolutely nothing about other nations but sacrificing us here because they've been given a directive from the United Nations to do so. I don't think that's right. I think we have to have an Australia first attitude. And at the very least, if you believe that the science was settled, which it's not, if you believe that the climate was going to change detrimentally because of carbon. Even if you believe that, you would go out there and you would fight for Australia and you would say, we're not doing anything unless China does the same. We're not doing anything unless the United States does, even more than us. We're not doing anything unless India does the same. At least that, right? But they don't even have the kahunas to fight for Australia. All they do is just sell us down the road every single time. They're the wrong people to be in power. They're not the right people. We need patriots in power, people that love Australia and will put Australia first ahead of anything else. That's the kind of attitude that we need to have. And that's the kind of attitude that obviously former President Trump has, number 45 has for his country. We need people here that do the same for us. And we don't have any right now, as far as I can see.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. And that goes to what I said earlier about followship. These people in power are happy to follow along with a global agenda and actually neglect their real work, which is to represent the interests of Australians and Australia. Ralph, I want to take a quick break and we're going to have to jam in a few things into the final segment, and I'll just lay it out for our audience. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the housing situation. Ralph has a background in the family real estate business. I want to ask him also about the voice referendum and the sentiment in the post-voice referendum era in the parliament. It seems that it's knocked Albanese's government for a six. And then I'm going to talk about some more personal stuff about what Ralph, as a senator, a hardworking senator, might happen to be able to do in his very brief spare time that he'll get in the Christmas break. We'll take that break now on Weekends with Jason Olborn, and welcome back to Weekends. And I'm with Senator Ralph Babet in the final segment of the Weekends show for the year. And for mine, it's my final show for the year as well. Now, Ralph, I wanted to talk to you about the referendum, the post-voice referendum, and the sentiment within the parliament, and particularly the government. It seems that Albanese got a wake-up call and a half when he went down some 61-39 in a referendum that it seemed that they were expected to win, or at least had that arrogance to think that they were, and it wasn't the case. What has been the sentiment in the parliament since? Does it feel like, or does it look like that, because the polling numbers have certainly gone down for Albanese, is he a dead man walking? Has he been profoundly affected by it, or is he just sort of just playing along and pretending it doesn't really matter?
I'll tell you the sentiment. I'll tell you the sentiment from the political elite, at least the ones that are in power today. In my opinion, the sentiment is that they are disgusted that you, the people, how dare you disobey them? How dare you not do what they say? That's the sentiment that I'm getting from the political class around. This is just my opinion. I'm just going to say it again. It's my opinion around Canberra right now. They're annoyed that you, the people, had a different opinion to them. They're annoyed that you didn't want to divide the nation based on race. Which is what it was. It was let's look at for some let's look at some different ways that we can divide this country. And why do they like division so much? Why do they like the political elite? Love division. They love to divide the country in all sorts of different ways, because a society which is divided is easier to control. That's the cold, hard facts. When we're busily bickering amongst each other on silly, stupid things, you know what? They have more power. They have more influence. They can dictate the direction of the country in a much simpler way when we're fighting amongst each other. And that's what the voice was about. It wasn't about bringing the nation together at all. That's not what it was about. If you want to bring the nation together, you focus on things that make us the same. You focus on things that we can all agree on: the love of country, patriotism, our shared values, which we all have. It doesn't matter if you're on the left or on the right, love of family, that kind of thing. That's what you focus on. You don't focus on, racial things. I think that's wrong. And I think it's pretty clear that it was a very deliberate attempt to tear the country apart. But obviously, it's had some repercussions for the Prime Minister as well. I mean, the Prime Minister is, not as popular as what he was when he first took office. And of course, he's not as popular as he was when he first took office. I'll give you an example, right? Now, it doesn't matter what you think about the conflict in the Middle East right now. We all have different views, fair enough, and we can argue till we're blue in the face about, where we all sit on that conflict. But the fact of the matter is for those of you who don't know, the United States has put together a coalition of about 10 countries, including the UK. I think Canada is part of it as well, and a few other countries have come together to defend the Red Sea from rebels. Now, they're coming together to defend trade in the Red Sea from Houthi rebels at the moment. And they asked Australia, they said, Australia, would you mind sending one of your ships to help out, defend shipping lanes and keep trade open from rebels? And the Prime Minister said, no, we're not sending a ship over to help the United States. We're just not going to do it. Now, the US is one of our major trading partners, one of our major security partners, and the PM didn't even have the balls to say, okay, our partners need our help. Our AUKUS partners need our help. Let's send a ship. He just said no. That's just one example of the Prime Minister being a weak beta male. That's what I think he is. I think he's a weak beta male. And he seems to be doing everything right now to bring our nation into disrepute. He is spitting in the face of our allies is what he's doing. And of course, people are going to be unhappy with him. Of course, his approval rating is going to go down. I just gave you one example. Another example was that he was recently praised by Hamas. He was recently praised by the Hamas, one of the Hamas head honchos quite recently, for his stance on Israel and Palestine. No matter what you might think about that conflict, the fact of the matter is our Prime Minister was praised by the leader of what we recognize as a terrorist organization. Okay, now I'm not advocating for, the suffering of the civilians that's happening right now in Palestine. That's horrible. But I'm just saying that our Prime Minister was praised by one of the leaders of Hamas. Our Prime Minister, in my opinion, spat in the face of our closest ally, the United States. Beta male. And when you go to the shops, when you get your power bill, when you go to, Coles or Woolworths or wherever else you decide to do your shopping and you open your wallet to pay and, you filled up half a trolley and it costs you $300, of course his approval rating's down. He's a weak leader. He's ineffective. He doesn't care enough about our country. And I think, Australians need to show him the door at the next election if they want to have a country left.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems that the polls are telling us that Albanese is in a lot of trouble. I checked the odds on Sportsbet and they're getting closer and closer. Labor's still in front, but not by much. Now, the point I wanted to make about the voice referendum, and this is what blew my mind, was that nobody picked up on the fact that the government made it a non-binding voice. It didn't really get much traction from the perspective that if it's a non-binding voice, it means for all the work that was going to be done by the Indigenous community to realise that these were the goals that they wanted to set, the government need only strike it down and say, well, we're not going to do that. It's non-binding. And so it was that the day after, when Parliament returned on the Monday after the voice referendum, Jacinta Price walks into Parliament and she asked the Parliament to investigate the idea of a royal commission into Aboriginal child sexual abuse and was knocked back cold by the same people that were promoting the voice. Did they have sour grapes, or was this a perfect example that the voice non-binding approach was only ever a tool to trick us?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the whole voice process, I believe it was an exercise in division. That's what it was. It was an exercise in division. It was an exercise in putting in place, what could have been another chamber of parliament. What could have been, we don't know, because they never gave any detail for the voice. It was an exercise in division. And when they had a chance, when the government had a chance to prove that they actually genuinely cared about Aboriginal people, they just said no. The government overwhelmingly said, no, we don't want to look into what's happening in Indigenous communities. Look, if you really cared about Aboriginal people, if you really cared about those remote communities, like obviously Jacinta Price does, then you would have said, okay, there's definitely something to look at here. We need to, unmask what's happening. We need to lift up the covers. We need to get in there. We need to audit everything that we can because we genuinely care about Aboriginal people. It's, in my opinion, the Canberra elite don't give a stuff about the sufferings of Aboriginal people in remote communities. In my personal opinion, I don't think they do. I just don't think they do. Because if they did, they would be doing more on the ground to help these people that are, in these remote areas. But how do you help people in remote areas? How do you do it? It's not with a voice to parliament that was undoubtedly going to be dominated by, inner city, woke, latte sipping, political elites. You have to get into those remote communities and you have to say, okay, what's the quickest way out of poverty? Education. Let's do more to help with education in that, in those areas. What's next? Employment. Let's see what we can do to encourage businesses to go and set up in these communities and provide jobs in those areas. What else can we do? Minimize red tape, minimize green tape, allow the people themselves to help themselves, to bring themselves out of the positions that they're in right now. That's how you would do it if you genuinely cared about, well, it applies to anyone really. That's how you would do it if you generally cared about someone and someone's welfare. Education, jobs, that's it. No care at all. And of course, looking into the, all the sexual violence, all the alcohol abuse and all these kind of things that happen over there. I mean, I'll give you another example. What we wanted to do, this is quite a little while back now, is we were looking at things like, alcohol bans or putting people that receive welfare, instead of basically giving them cash, putting them on a card whereby they couldn't use the card to gamble or buy alcohol and things like that. And the Labor Party was against it. Right? If they genuinely cared about these communities, they would do these sorts of things, because whether we like it or not, you can't be giving people government money and then they take it's not their money, it's government money, to go out and, buy booze and things like that. And then the community gets even worse, and the sexual violence and all that kind of thing. So I actually don't think that, the political elite care that much about Aboriginal people. I just don't.
Yeah, it's a fair, reasonable argument there, isn't it? That if you really did care, then you would just do what you needed to do, and it's this pandering to the idea of saying, well, no, we can't restrict people in certain ways. For what reason? Exactly, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, Ralph, in the remaining couple of minutes that we've got, I wanted to ask you, given your background in real estate, how is the Australian property market really faring at the moment under 13 or 14 interest rate rises?
Look, the average person is struggling, absolutely struggling. I obviously don't work in the family real estate business full time anymore because I'm in the Senate most of the time. But obviously, I still talk to my family, and I say, what's happening out there? And people just can't afford to rent anymore. I mean, if you rent in the outer suburbs of Melbourne a regular 4-bedroom home, you might be paying $650 a week for a regular normal house in some of these areas in the outer suburbs. I mean, when the average person is probably owning, not too much over $1,000 a week, you're asking to pay that much. Then you got your grocery bills, and you got your phone, then you got your internet, and then you got your power bills and everything else. It's really, really hard out there. And you know what? It's only going to get worse, because we all know this. This is not anything new, but the Labor Party has, greenlit hundreds of thousands, I think at last count, 650 or so thousand people, more extra migrants to come into the country so far. And we don't have, now I'm obviously not against immigration. I'm a migrant myself, but it has to be sustainable. And all they're doing right now is they've opened the floodgates for anyone and everyone to come into the country, and it's not right. Like, yes, of course, we should have immigration, but we should have it in a sustained way when our infrastructure can and is able to handle it. Let's build homes for the people that are here first. Let's build roads and hospitals and schools and everything for the people that are here in Australia. And then once we've done that, then let's take the best and the brightest from across the world. Don't just open the floodgates, come one, come all. Or even better, why don't we do this? Why don't we encourage people that are already here to have children? Why don't we put in place policies here to encourage men and women in loving marriages to have their own kids? Why don't we do things like income splitting, which is a United Australia Party policy, where we can say, okay, if you're married, husband and wife, as an example, husband works, why don't you split your income in between husband and wife, even though wife might be home looking after the kids, or husband's looking at home looking after the kids, and then your income is divided amongst both of you, so you pay less tax. Why don't we do that instead? So I think this whole push at the moment to flood the nation with a whole bunch of immigrants is actually a Ponzi scheme. What it's designed to do is it's designed to make GDP look better. Because I don't know if your viewers might actually know this, but Australia is actually at the moment in a per capita recession. So the whole reason why they're flooding people in right now is to fudge the books, basically. That's why they're doing it. And that just goes to show how bad these people are at managing the economy, where they have to resort to such a tactic to fudge our books instead of being sound economic managers.
It's one of the most disturbing things, isn't it? The idea of using immigration as the one-track way of showing, on paper at least, economic growth when everyone is feeling the pinch, and each day the price of rent goes up and more people are out of the rental market one way or another. It's quite shocking. Now, Ralph, we've got to the last 2 minutes of the show, and I noticed on one of your social media feeds a little while back, you asked the question about people's favourite whiskey, and it seemed that you had hundreds of comments out there about people all were very much armchair whiskey connoisseurs. Can you tell me, did you discover anything new out of all of that commentary that you received from your supporters?
Nothing new, but I'll actually say that one of my favorite whiskeys is probably just, I'm a simple man. I don't mind the old dimple 12-year-old of a Johnny Black or something like that. And on a special occasion, I don't mind getting a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label, which is, quite a nice drop. But, I do like my whiskies. I guess these days I'm not so much of a beer drinker anymore because I'm getting a bit older now. If I even look at a beer, I just get bloated immediately. So I try and ease off those ones. But I don't mind a whiskey here and there. And, one thing that I would love to do actually is maybe sit down with you on one of your channels one day and have like a whiskey night and taste a couple of whiskeys and, talk back and forth and maybe have a cigar or something like that. You, myself, and a couple of the other influencers. I think it might make an interesting podcast type of thing. So I'm throwing it out there. Get in touch with Jason, and let's do something like that one day, I think.
I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's a lot of fun because at the very least, for all the hard work that you've done throughout the last year and particularly the 18 months, you need to be able to let your hair down, recharge the batteries and keep that big grin on your face, Ralph, because it provides us with enormous comfort and realisation that we have at least one warrior in the parliament who is going about doing the work that if we were able to get ourselves elected, we would be doing. And the fact that we haven't is the fact that you represent so many people, not just the people of Victoria. So I want to take this small opportunity to say thank you for the work that you continue to do, not just for the people of Victoria, but for all people, for the time that you take on this show and other shows that I've done and other people here on TNT Radio. It is greatly appreciated. I wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I look forward to speaking with you next year, and perhaps it may well be that we light up a Cuban or a Dominican as we look forward to celebrating in the moment in some of those little wonderful things that we do. We have reached the end of this show. I want to thank everyone for their support this year on TNT Radio.